Tonight, more details emerge about how Prime Minister Trudeau could have avoided the scandal rocking his government.
We don't have a youth center. We don't have a lot of places to go.
We bring you further into Arctic Nunavut to show you how the youth of Pangatung deal with isolation.
We are dead set against clear cutting, and we've been asking them to change their methods of cutting.
And Grassy Narrows chief warns against reopening the Whiskey Jack forest to business, which could mean more mercury poisoning in the water system. Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Some new developments today in the SNC-Lavalin scandal involving the two women at the center of it, former Justice Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould and former Treasury Board Minister Jane Philpott. Their sources are telling CTV News that Wilson-Raybould gave Prime Minister Justin Trudeau a list of 5 conditions to resolve this dispute. One included an apology. Philpott seemed to confirm that to CTV, saying that a proper apology from Trudeau would have been enough. Both women have said they stood up for truth and their principles, saying that a line was crossed and there was inappropriate political pressure to interfere in the prosecution of SNC-Lavalin on corruption charges. Both were booted from caucus on Tuesday and now sit as independents. Wilson-Raybould was asked about those reports today on her way into question period. Here's what she told reporters.
Well, I respect the order in council that was provided for, and in respecting the order in council, I'm not speaking about anything after the time I was Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
More on those conditions that Wilson-Raybould was said to have issued to Trudeau. Sources told CTV News that after she was shuffled out as Attorney General, she demanded that he fire his top advisor Gerald Butts, Privy Council Clerk Michael Wernick, and Senior Legal Advisor Matthew Bouchard. She also reportedly wanted an apology from the Prime Minister for the pressure put on her by his staff. And she said she wanted assurances that her replacement would not authorize a deferred prosecution of the Quebec engineering and construction giant that was facing corruption charges. Of course, none of that happened. Here's Bob Fife, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail.
But if I may say so, Beverly, if in fact it is true, these things have almost all happened. In any case, Butts is gone, Warnick is gone, the only person left is Matthew Bouchard, and he may not be long for the world. And it doesn't look like the government can do a deferred prosecution agreement because of the political fallout. So if these were conditions that she put down, they should have probably agreed to them at the time, because they wouldn't be down 10% points in the polls with the possibility of them losing the election campaign.
A Northern Ontario community trying to fix its housing crisis said it will not be paying a former consultant $1.2 million. Cat Lake First Nation declared a state of emergency in January. They reached a housing agreement with Indigenous Services for $12 million for more houses. Our Willow Fiddler joins us now. Willow, you've been following Cat Lake since February. What's the latest?
Well, we received a statement today from Cat Lake, the chief of Cat Lake First Nation, Chief Matthew Kiwe-Cabo. He's calling it atrocious that a former consultant is expecting to get paid over $1 million from the community's housing crisis. Last week, the Globe and Mail reported that Thunder Bay consultant Jerry Paulin was to get paid $1.2 million from an agreement that Cat Lake signed with Indigenous Services. In the statement, Cat Lake says they will not be paying him shocking amounts of money. It reads, the notion that Jerry Paulin was responsible for getting money for Cat Lake housing is inaccurate.
So tell us a little bit more about this agreement that they made with ISC.
Right, so the agreement comes back in January. Cat Lake declared a state of emergency for its poor housing conditions. Inspection reports revealed dangerous levels of mold in many of the houses there, and leadership and community members have long believed that the mold problem is linked to children and elders and other community members getting sick and even dying. So after that state of emergency was declared in January, they reached an interim agreement in February for $10 million, and that would get them some new housing units and some housing supplies in. That's also when Cat Lake says they ended their relationship with the consultant Jerry Paulin. A final agreement with Indigenous Services was reached last month for just over $12 million. And housing units and supplies, I just want to note that some of that has been delivered to the community now by the Winter Road, but we know that it's still not enough, and that there are still some families who won't be getting new housing, and that continues to be a real major health and safety concern there.
So what's next for Cat Lake and this consultant?
Yeah, so we heard from Paulin today in an email. He called it an awful situation, and that he's worked long and hard for Cat Lake, and many members and elders have contacted me to offer their support, is what he tells APTN. In his statement, Chief Matthew Kiwikabo notes that the mold issue in their homes is something that they've been working on with the feds since the 90s, long before Paulin was ever hired as a consultant to work with them on housing issues. So the chief says in his statement again, the idea that Jerry Paulin or any consultant expects to get $1 million windfall out of money that we desperately need for houses for Cat Lake families is atrocious. He continues to say that Paulin knows the desperate state of our housing situation. His claims for this huge payout are demeaning to all the families who are suffering in Cat Lake. Further in that statement, the chief says they haven't agreed to paying Paulin with the housing crisis money, but they've proposed options that are being reviewed right now.
Very interesting stuff. Willow, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Melissa.
To Manitoba now, where tribal police shot and killed a man on the Long Plain First Nation on Tuesday. 23-year-old Ben Richard lived with his mother at Long Plain and had allegedly been firing a weapon inside the home when Manitoba First Nations police were called. A confrontation took place, resulting in one or more officers discharging their firearm. The Independent Investigation Unit of Manitoba is investigating the shooting and won't confirm any more details at this time. Time for us to take a quick break, but here's a look at what's coming up on Nation to Nation and tomorrow's weather forecast.
Hello, I'm Todd Lamoran, and here's what's coming up on Nation to Nation. Our political panel of MPs discusses the dropping of Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott from the Liberal caucus. It appears a secretly taped conversation between Wilson-Raybould and top civil servant Michael Wernick was the last straw. Wernick was once Deputy Minister of Indigenous Affairs, and under his watch secretly monitored child welfare activist Cindy Blackstock. She will also be our guest. And Saskatoon Phoenix columnist Doug Cuthand says that for many Indigenous people, the Liberal brand may be damaged beyond repair. That's coming up after the national news.
Off to the east coast, we've got 3 and sunshine in Charlottetown, 0 and rain in St. John's. -3 and snow in Cartwright, -7 snow in Happy Valley Goose Bay. Chibougamau is snowing at -2, Saguenay 1 and sunshine, 4 in Montreal. 3 and rain in Peterborough, 0 and snow in Ottawa. 5 and rain in Sioux Lookout, rain and 9 in Thunder Bay. Pucketawagons in at -5, clear skies, -2 and clear in God's Lake. 2s for Barons River and Princess Harbour, 5 and sunny in Winnipeg. 8 and sunshine in Saskatoon, 11 and rain in Regina. -7 and sunshine in Stony Rapids, 1 and sunny in L'Orange. Welcome back. What is it like growing up in a community in the Arctic where to get to anywhere else you have to fly? In the small community of Pangertung, our Charlotte Mort Jacobs caught up with some youth to talk about how isolation affects their everyday lives.
Welcome to Pangertung, a place where true north, strong and free isn't found on a t-shirt, but is an actual lived experience. It's also a place of hardships. In the spring of 2018, a dozen youth attempted suicide here. The crisis caught the attention from Southern media. And while everyone asked how such a tragedy could happen, no one asked the kids that live here what everyday life was like in the isolated community. Denise Nauyuk is a natural leader.
Maybe because I'm not shy, like to talk in front of people.
She's the president of Pang's Youth Council. Like other students, Nauyuk is planning to go down south to attend university. But dreams of academia didn't come easy.
I dropped out when I was in grade 10, but then seeing people my age, they were graduating and all that, and I felt like I had to go back, so I did. And now I'm really close to finishing.
She believes it's not that youth don't wish to graduate, they just have trouble attending class. Many here told APTN they don't connect with the curriculum, which is not rooted in Inuit values. Same goes for having little to do in town.
We don't have a youth center. We don't have a lot of places to go. People usually just hang out outside the school, the stores, arena, but I think it's closed now.
This youth center was forced to close after federal funding dried up in 2015.
Who do I give it to after?
Since then, Eric Lawler, the former manager of the center, says youth have gotten into trouble out of sheer boredom.
See idle hands, they're looking for something to do, and sometimes what they find to do is not always the best thing to get into.
Lawler is Métis and originally from New Brunswick, but has lived in Pang for 15 years. He's a father of 5 and is worried about the environment his kids are growing up in.
Places to go, places to hang out, socialization. Like, people need a place to socialize. There's nowhere to go and just relax.
There's a price to isolation, an extremely high cost of living here.
I'd say I'd be rich if it wasn't for the cost of living. Like, that takes all our money, like for food, and like even if I can't travel down south, that's just too expensive. Like, take all 5 of us down, it's over 15 grand roughly, just to get to Ottawa.
And housing options are very limited.
The biggest issue, I think, is the overcrowdedness, where you're dealing with sometimes 2, 3 families, 13 to 14 people living under the same roof, 3 bedrooms, like trying to find a place to sleep, like, and the amount of food that they go through as well, like the conflict that can create.
But it's not just infrastructure the hamlet lacks. There is also a need for trained professionals. Pang doesn't have a full-time physician. When Lawler's 10-month-old son had a fever, he had no option but to be medevac to Iqaluit.
It just adds to more health problems. Like, I know 2 people the night before I arrived at the boarding home, 2 people had to walk around town all night because they didn't have a place to go.
Having a traveling doctor that only visits every few months is just one of the things he wants to change. Lawler, who now works as the community economic developer, is putting all his energy into improving housing options.
More houses need to be built. Self-sustaining houses where the expenses on utilities and everything isn't as extravagant as they are.
You can't paint everyone with the same brush here. Each youth has challenges growing up in a remote Nunavut community.
They really look up to me. They always tell me that they're not going to be sure what they're going to do when I'm done high school.
But it's those like Nauyuk who understand the remoteness, listen to the concerns, and plan to go to great lengths to resolve them. Charlotte Mort Jacobs, APTN National News, Pangertung.
Grassy Narrows First Nation fought hard for a clear-cutting ban as the community struggles to recover from decades of mercury poisoning that's ravaged their community. In 2007, the Ontario government agreed that the boreal forest and the people of Grassy Narrows had suffered enough and banned logging there. But leaders fear that the new Doug Ford government could reopen the Whiskey Jack forest to business. I talked to Chief Rudy Turtle earlier. So I think that most people who are watching are likely aware that your community struggles with the effects of mercury poisoning from a pulp and paper mill upstream from your community and has done so for decades. But many might not know that logging can actually lead to even more mercury being released into the environment. Can you explain?
Well, I've been told that whenever there's clear cuts, or when it's been absolutely clear cut, that when it rains, especially heavy rain, the rain and water will carry the sediment down to the streams, and also while it does that, it stirs up the natural mercury that's in the ground, and it leaks into the river.
So in the next year or so, I'm told that the provincial government is set to discuss its forestry management plan for the years 2022 till 2032. You guys have had a moratorium on logging since 2007, I believe. I guess my question would be, what are your concerns as they start to discuss the forest management strategy for 2022 to 2032? What are your concerns?
Well, I guess the main concern is that our voice, our opinions are not being heard. We've had previous discussions with MNR in the past, but they've never taken seriously anything that we have said to them. We are dead set against clear cutting, and we've been asking them to change their methods of cutting. And with the forest management plan, we don't agree with the volume of cutting that's going to be taking place in the plan.
So there's been a change in government. You had a Liberal government, Kathleen Wynne previously, and there's been a moratorium on logging, industrial logging in the Whiskey Jack forest. We've got a new government, a Conservative government, Doug Ford's government. Have you had communication with people of this new government with regards to use of Whiskey Jack forest?
No, we haven't had any. We haven't had any meetings with people from the new government. I will be meeting Minister Phillips in a couple of weeks, but I have met with the regional director of MNRF, and I've expressed my concerns, and we will be meeting with them in the next couple of weeks as well.
And you guys there's a protest planned for Queen's Park, June 20th. What's on the list of things that you want on the front burner for this government?
Well, we're going to continue protesting regarding the mercury. As you are aware, we've been in the news quite often, very often, about the mercury issue. We're going to be discussing that, but we're also going to be throwing logging in there, because we don't want logging in our community or within our traditional territory.
So just for our people at home who may not be aware of this, about 90% of your community has been affected by mercury poisoning. And what percentage of people actually get compensation through the disability board for that? And what are you guys pushing for?
Well, about only 6% of the people get compensated from the Mercury Disability Board. So we are pushing that every person that's living in the community and every person that's been affected by mercury, that they all get compensated. Mm-hmm. So really we're pushing to get 100%. Like we would like to see the whole community get compensated instead of just that 6%.
And I guess last question for you, there's the federal government had planned or had committed to building a mercury treatment facility in Grassy Narrows for people who are suffering from mercury poisoning, so they can be treated in their community by their community members. That was a commitment from former Minister Jane Philpott a couple of years ago. Where are we at with that happening or not happening?
Well, The feasibility study was done, but we just need to get into the actual making of the facility, and that's where we're stuck. We haven't met with anybody since we met with Philpott, and just today I did get a call from Minister Reagan, so hopefully we are planning to meet in a couple of weeks, and hopefully things will start moving again.
Well, good luck with that. It's been 2 years. Hopefully you can get them to get moving on it. Thanks so much for joining me, Chief Turtle.
Thank you.
APTN Investigates reporter Rob Smith was in Cardston, Alberta for a story about the history of white supremacy in Canada. But while he was in town, some of the headlines and the people caught his attention. Here now is a preview of tomorrow's episode of APTN Investigates Cardston, Canada.
Reconciliation is not going to come easy. The signs of a deeply rooted problem can be seen all over Canada. In 2018, 2 incidents in a small southern Alberta town on the edge of Canada's largest reserve made national headlines. Blood Tribe members say they weren't isolated incidents.
You know, my youngest boy, he got taken away, and I could still picture his smiles, laughing, those little taken away. But our family kind of got torn apart ever since that time.
The town of Cardston has become very used to treating First Nations people like this. There's a system set up in this town to fail First Nations people. If you injure us,
he must have been going pretty fast.
You're not going to have any repercussions.
You can watch the whole story tomorrow night, right after APTN National News. It's time for us to take another break, but I've got more news to come, and here's the rest of tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting off in northern Alberta, we've got sunshine at -3 in Fort Chip, +3 in Fort McMurray and sunny. 9 for Red Deer, 11 for Calgary, sunshine. 12 in rain in Campbell River, 14 in rain in Vancouver, 16 in cloudy in Penticton. 1 and snow in Dease Lake, -2 in Fort Nelson. Mayo's in at -2 and sunny. Dawson City is 0. -4 in Norman Wells. Wrigley is -2 and clear skies. Wattie -9. Tuck is in at -13 and clear, -18 in Sax Harbor, clear skies. Baker Lake is -18, -22 in Chesterfield, -19 in Whale Cove. -20 and clear in Arctic Bay, -18 and clear in Igloolik, and -19 and clear in Clyde River. Welcome back. A British historic site in Halifax is getting a facelift, but it's more than repairing a roof. Citadel Hill was a British fortress built to protect Halifax back in 1749. It's now a tourist attraction operated by Parks Canada, who is working to indigenize its national sites. An exhibit including Mi'kmaq history is set to open here in 2020.
Which we're working very closely and collaboratively with the Mi'kmaq to ensure that Mi'kmaq perspectives are reflected and Mi'kmaq worldview are reflected in the stories that we share through that exhibit at the site.
That's your news for this Thursday. You can find more on our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Stay tuned now for Nation to Nation, and I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
And James Philpott are no longer members of the Liberal caucus. The trust that previously existed between these two individuals and our team has been broken.
Tonight on Nation to Nation, Jody Wilson-Raybould has been kicked from caucus. The Prime Minister says trust is broken, but is that the issue?
The issue here is whether or not the government attempted to intervene in a legal prosecution to get a very powerful company off a bribery charge.
Justin Trudeau has said reconciliation is his most important job. Firing Wilson-Raybould seems to mean the opposite.
You know, reconciliation to me is not so much in words, it's in their actions. And these actions are not encouraging.
The next election is
and
around
what does
the
this
corner.
mean for the upcoming election? It may not be good news for the Liberals.
Our people are becoming very politically savvy, and so I think they're going to see through this, and it's going to be difficult for the Liberals in the fall.
I'm Todd Lamran, and welcome to Nation to Nation. Jody Wilson-Raybould says she was trying to protect the Prime Minister on a taped conversation between her and Michael Wernick, formerly the most powerful public servant in Canada. Wernick says that Trudeau was adamant about a deal for SNC-Lavalin to avoid going to trial on corruption charges. But Wilson-Raybould was not going to interfere because it would give the appearance of political interference. Now we know what happened to her, as the Prime Minister called it unconscionable that Wilson-Raybould recorded the conversation and booted her, along with Jane Philpott from the Liberal government's caucus. So let's get right to our political panel. I'm joined today by the Parliamentary Secretary for